First Things, episode number 43.
I seem to be lost.
And so you're working around the clock so you don't take time for yourself to feel like an actual human being.
I used to feel like no matter how hard I worked, I was just spinning my wheels.
Trying to be perfect, we try to have everything in place at one point in time, and you can't.
Hello, my friends, and welcome back to First Things, the podcast dedicated to practical productivity based on modern research. My name is Brandon Vaughn, and it's my goal to help you apply productive solutions to your life to help you live with less stress, greater passion, and amazing results. Well, so good to have you back with us today as we are in the last chapters of the Assertiveness workbook. I hope that you have been enjoying this series on assertiveness. I hope that you found some insights in various places and have been able to implement that into your life. Hoping that you are finding yourself more assertive, not aggressive, mind you, more assertive in your life, and seeing how that can be practical in your life. Moving away from some passive styles of communication, moving away from some aggressive styles, from some passive-aggressive styles, and hope that you've been benefiting from that. Now, in these last 4 chapters of the book, we are dealing really with worst-case scenarios. So what happens when you face not just criticism, but all-out conflict? Today, we're talking about learning to say no. Now, I actually devoted a whole episode of this in the very first few episodes that I did. If you go to firstThingsProductivity.com/09, you will hear a whole long episode that I did on learning to say no, freedom from manipulation, conflict, criticism, and guilt. So I don't want to really rehash a lot of what I said in that particular episode, but I would encourage you to go listen to it if you haven't listened to it, or listen to it again if it's been a long time since you've listened to it. I quote a lot of research in that particular episode talking about why we should be saying no. And in fact, in that episode, one of my favorite sayings I've ever come up with, I did in that episode, and that is your most effective no is a well-defined yes. In other words, if you don't really know who you are as a person, if you aren't secure in your identity, if you don't know what your true north is, what your passions, where your creativity lies, if you don't know what the yeses are in your life, you will always have a hard time saying no to things. It's very easy to say no to things when you know what your yes categories are in your life. So that's a very important thing that we need to keep in mind. And I would encourage you, if you find it hard to say no in your life, do you really know what your yes categories are in your life? Because I can speak from experience, as well as the experience of many people that I've helped in life, that usually people that don't have a sense of who they are, what their yeses are in life, really struggle with saying no to things in life. You really need to have that yes category really locked in order to really know what to say no to. Also, in that episode, I talked about a couple of emergency tools for saying no to things. These were things that I called the figure 8, the wet sponge, transparency, and prosecutor. And I don't want to go into all the detail of it there. I think we'll circle around and do some special episodes on that. But for instance, a figure 8 is literally the number 8 turned sideways, the symbol for infinity. And this is a technique where you persistently and calmly keep repeating yourself. It's something that you should only use sparingly. But instead of saying no, you just simply state what it is that you want. So the example that I gave on that particular episode is that of a salesman, and I don't know if you've ever noticed this, I've always noticed this, that if you get a sales call, many times they will give up after 3 tries. Now, many people just don't answer the phone, some people just hang up the phone, but if you want to have an excellent way of practicing saying no, practicing assertiveness, then start taking some of those sales calls because they're excellent practice for you. And see in your own experience if you can't get them to give up after 3 attempts of talking you into something. And then after 3 attempts, if they're still going at it, then hang up on them. But this is a free experiment that many of us have in our lives. So the example I gave is, "Hi, Mr. Vaughn. I wanted to call and give you an exciting opportunity to sign up for credit protection. Can I sign you up for a free trial for only $50 a month?" You say, "Thank you for the offer, but I'm not interested in this right now." That is your no statement. And it's very kindly stated. The salesperson comes back, "Okay, Mr. Vaughn, I'm sure I don't have to tell you how identity theft is a common problem. You owe it to yourself to protect yourself and your family. Now, can I give you this free trial with a monthly price, great monthly price of just $50? You say, and this is the figure 8. This is your loop, your infinity loop. You say the same thing you just said. You make some great points, but I'm not interested in this right now. Sure, but keep in mind this free trial is a limited time offer. You have no risk. And if you don't like it, you can just simply cancel in 30 days. So what card would you like me to put this on today, Mr. Vaughn? Here's the figure 8. Thank you for the offer. I do appreciate it, but I'm not interested in this right now. And then usually my experience, the salesperson says, okay, Mr. Vaughn, thank you for your time today. Have a good day. Click. And they get off the phone really quick. This is what I call the figure 8. This is a technique that you can utilize in saying no to someone. And that is that you just firmly stand your ground and keep repeating what it is that you want, or what is going to be your take or your stance on this particular issue. The reason why this is a very important technique is because I think many of us don't like saying no, or we feel like we're a failure in saying no because we give up too quickly. We say no to someone and someone counters and comes right back to us, and then we just give in. The fact is, most people, including salespeople, will usually give up after 2 or 3 attempts. Usually we cave in after the first attempt that they come back to us. So we say, no, I just can't do that this time. And they say, well, I really could use your help. And we're not ready for the fact that they're not going to respect our opinion right away. Remember, they're not listening to this podcast. They're not reading this book. They don't understand the assertiveness like what we're learning here. So many of us, we hear this counter and we give in. We're not ready to face it. And what I'm saying is, in your life, you should be ready to face these types of counter statements that people will come back to us. If we're ready for that, and we use something like this figure 8, where we just keep calmly repeating what it is that we want, or what our view is, or where we're going to stand on this issue. Many people will give up after 2 or 3 tries. And if you're aware that they're going to come back 2 or 3 times, then you can easily stand and say no to things. Anyway, I said I wasn't going to repeat all of that. There are 3 other techniques I talk about: the wet sponge, the transparency, and the prosecutor. We will talk a little bit about some of those today in this particular episode, but I would encourage you to go back and listen to that particular episode. So, chapter 13, the assertive no. Here's what the author says at the beginning of this chapter. He says, saying no. This is the hallmark difficulty of the passive style. Passive people usually have a hard time turning down requests from others. Any request. Doesn't matter how unreasonable they may be. Why is saying no so important? Here's the key point. If you cannot say no, you are not in charge of your own life. That's it, period. If others ask you to do something, you have to do it. There is no other choice. In effect, you are a slave. You can't make any of the rules. You can't decide what you will and won't do. The only way you can be left in peace is if others don't ask you to do anything. But they will ask. Of course they will. Who wouldn't? Imagine having a genie who will carry out any request you make. It would be wonderful. If you can't say no, you are such a genie for the rest of the world. Once the rest of the world discovers it, they will be unable to resist. And he gives a bunch of examples here. Can I borrow your couch? Will you drive me to the doctor's? I go 3 times a week. Here's some more of my work for you to do. You can handle the kids on your own, right? I'm moving this afternoon. Can you come and help? I know I'm an adult, but I need someone to take care of me. Mom, iron my shirt. Can you write this report and put my name on it? Get this to me by Friday. And those are some pretty good examples of this. The fact is, many of us also don't say no because we don't believe we're allowed to say no. We see this from a lot of different barriers. People who really overuse passive-aggressive styles also have problems saying no because many times it's the very thing that's fueling their passive-aggressive styles in the first place. If they say no to something, then they don't have an excuse for being passive-aggressive like they did because they had to say yes to something. Now, the author gives several examples of barriers to saying no to people. Why don't we say no to people? Why is it so hard sometimes to say no? Well, the first thing is a Disneyland view of the world. And I've talked about this many times on the show. There's many times that we feel very frustrated that people shouldn't be more considerate. They should just respect our boundaries. They should just know how hard it is for me right now. I shouldn't have to tell them all the time. I shouldn't have to say anything. And the very fact that I do really upsets us to the point that in a very strange way, we won't actually stand up for ourselves. We won't say no to things. But again, we have to escape this idea that the world should be better. We talked about this last week, I believe, or at least the week before, about communication styles. I mentioned to you a big secret that I've recently learned, and that is what may be considered a very pessimistic view of life. I don't know, but I think it's reality. And that is that people in general are very poor communicators. And therefore, when someone comes to me with something of a comment that would be considered constructive feedback or criticism, I realize that 9,999 people out of 10,000 people, and that's being very generous, is going to really goof it up. They're going to utterly do a terrible job at communicating this idea to me. They're going to say it in the wrong tone. They're going to use the wrong words. It's going to come across condescending. Their body language is going to be bad. They could have said it in a nicer format or a nicer timing or in private. They're going to do everything wrong. And even if they do some things right, they're still going to do some things really wrong. Now, I have a couple of choices here, and I've mentioned this again in past weeks. I could sit there and say, you should be better than that. And it very much upsets me and insults me that you aren't better and that you critiqued me in this. And that's an approach I could take in life. And quite honestly, maybe it's a fair approach. I don't know. I don't think it's a very productive approach. I don't think it's an assertive approach to life. But I found myself many times being very upset with people. I mean, that's one of two responses. Either I'm upset with people or I internalize it and just assume that because people said something to me, it must be right. If they said it to me, then it must be who I really am. They said I was sloppy, therefore I must really be sloppy. I internalize it. I make it part of my identity. Or I go around this life very pissed and burned out and really upset that people are like the way they are and therefore carry a chip around my shoulder and tempt myself very much to dip into passive aggressive styles of communication. Therefore, I will thwart any efforts that they have. I will sabotage what they do, but do it in very passive ways. I just won't try as hard because they are really a poor communicator. And thus they don't motivate me. They make me angry. They make me feel bad all of the time. I was thinking about this with a former boss just the other day, thinking that I suffered a lot under this one person, thinking this very same thing, that every time that I was around this person, they were a downer. They just always had something critical to say, never something good to say. It was always something bad. It was always negative. They always said it in a very rude, nasty way that was rather condescending and insulting. And I really hated to be around this person, to be honest with you. It was a downer for me. And it made me angry over time, very angry that I would even have to put up with this person. Why am I having to put up with this person? They should be better. Why can't they be like that person? That person handles it so much better. Why am I stuck with this person? But then I started having a paradigm shift of what I'm talking about in these last episodes, where I could say, I'm privileged. I should have it better in life. I should have a better boss. I should have someone that's more understanding. Then to come to the realization, you know what, Brandon? Everyone sucks at this. The majority of people. You could replace this person with someone else and they may be better in these 5 areas, but then they're going to be worse in these other 5 areas. Everyone's going to really be pretty pathetic in this area. So why don't you just accept the fact that people suck in this area and take the extra mile to go beyond that and find your own pathway in life, your own journey in life. And I started doing that with this person. It was hard at first. I'm not telling you something from an ivory tower of, wow, this is just so easy to implement. I am saying that I believe it's a much better way to approach your life. It's a much more effective way. It's much more likely for you to tap into your potential, your creativity, your passions if you go this way. But it's not an easy thing at all. It's very hard sometimes. And it took me months of being around this person that I would go out and I would just be fuming from having to been around this person with their negativity to start thinking, okay, this person is just a really bad communicator. Now, what would it sound like if a good communicator was saying this? What are they actually saying? Let me get rid of all of the smoke and mirrors, all the nasty little snarks that this person does. Let me get to the heart of what they're trying to say. And it was possible. It was really possible. And I actually learned to, well, I was going to say like the person. Well, and I like the person, but I still don't like their communication styles. But I was able to see through all of that into the real heart of what they were saying. And I wasn't as miserable around that person. Now, again, it may not be my preference all the time to be around that person, but I could at least internalize what they were trying to say without internalizing it to my identity. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's a paradigm shift. It really is. And again, if you feel like you deserve to have better people in your life, you will fight this and you will go around very disgusted. You will either internalize what people are saying. You will constantly be pushing back in passive aggressive ways because you deserve better than this. And again, maybe you do deserve better than this, but I'm telling you, that's a really sad way of living life. And yes, it's very humbling to go back and say, I am going to accept this person as they are, flaws and all, and do extra work. And then that voice comes, well, I shouldn't have to do extra work. They should just be better. They should try harder. They should take some classes or do something. And you say, well, that's not the way it is. And I can't control that. All I can do is to decide for my own life. And I refuse to let this person be a drain of my positivity. I refuse to let this person bring me down anymore. So I am choosing to go the extra mile and to use a lot of brain resources right now to try to drill through what they are saying, what it would sound like with a person who was not like that, who was a much better communicator. And I'm telling you, it makes a big difference. It has for me. And I would love for some of you to try it and at least tempt it to just see if it really does make a difference in your life. But I will again tell you, it's not an easy thing. So why else do we not say no to things? Well, another reason why we don't say no is because we feel they won't accept it. That if we say no, they will just keep coming back to us and keep asking us over and over and over again. And so saying yes to them is just a way to shut them up. And the fact is, like we said at the beginning of the episode, I think the majority of times that we give in to things, we are probably on the verge of the other person stopping asking us in the first place. They were probably just one more no to giving up, and we turned around and we said yes to it and gave in, and therefore the person got their way. They controlled us, they manipulated us in a way into what they wanted us to do. And this isn't a hard, fast rule, but again, I think for the majority of situations that there is a 2 to 3 attempt rule. As I said at the beginning of the episode, I won't go through all of that again. But the fact is, I think that after 2 or 3 attempts at something, people usually give up asking something. They just assume that you're not going to give in, that the answer is, in fact, no, and they will just quit asking you. Now, again, there are exceptions to that. So if your boss comes to you and says, I need you to do this, well, we've talked about this before in previous episodes. You always have a choice. And I know this is kind of controversial. It can be something that people will always want to come up with exceptions to it. And yes, there probably are exceptions to it. But you still always have a choice. You have a choice to say no to your boss. Granted, if you say no, it may mean that you no longer have a job, but you still have a choice. And the more we can embrace choice in our life, that it isn't that I have to, but I can, or I want to, or I choose to, it produces much more power in your life. And we shouldn't so relinquish control of our lives. Yes, there are times you go up to the military base and you say, I want in, and they say, no, you're not getting in. Well, okay, you probably aren't going to get in. There's just some things that you're not going to get your way, and it's not about getting your way. It's about choosing what you're going to do in life. So the whole thing is, don't give up so easily. Another reason why that we don't often say no is it's tied too much to our identity. They won't accept me. They will reject me. They will push me away if I say no. I'd be all alone. And so much this is tied into the fear of death. I know I've spoken about this sometime in the past, but so much of what we do is tied into the fear of death. You should take any kind of fear that you have and see how much it ties back to dying and death. Why do people fear airplanes? Well, they fear airplanes because they'll crash. And what happens if it crashes? Well, then I'll die. Why are people afraid of heights? Well, I'm afraid of heights because I may fall. And what happens if I fall? I may die. Why do people fear being alone, being rejected? Because then I'll go through my entire life by myself, and therefore I will die all alone. Why do I fear losing my job? Well, I fear losing my job because then I won't have money to buy things. And if I don't have money to buy things, I can't buy food. And if I can't buy food, then I'll starve. And if I starve, then I'll die. It always goes back down to death. Death is this very centered fear, focus of fear. And everything kind of stems around that. Same thing with people's acceptance of you. And I know we've got to cover identity issues at some point in the future, but we're not going to cover it today. I know at some point we're going to have to deal with some of these issues. But we've got to get past this. Saying no to someone doesn't mean they are going to reject you. And if they do, then maybe you're better off without them in your life. And that's something to think about. You cannot play the role of a servant in your life. I think you should serve people. I think serving people is a very good thing. But it's one thing to serve people. It's another thing to be their slave. We are not to be people's slaves, but we are to help people and to serve them with our passions and our creativity. Serve them with what our true north is, our yes categories in life, and say no to the things that violate those yes categories. That's when we turn from a servant to a slave. We're not to be slaves in this life. And the last reason the author gives, and this is kind of a big one to some people, is that we feel like I don't have a right to say no, that it's being selfish. And some of us have been raised in various reasons, maybe religious reasons, certain types of parent styles that we were raised under, certain types of schools, certain types of friends, that is basically a selfish thing to say no. And the fact is, it's not. In fact, saying yes to everything is actually maybe being very selfish because you are not respecting the other person. The fact is that this world works better when people are living toward their passions and their creativity. And they may sound like that should be contradictory, that we will conflict with each other. The fact is that people conflict with each other because they think they should have their own way, that they should be the center of the universe and that it should revolve around them. It's good that people tell us no. It's good that we tell people no, because this world does not revolve around us. if anything, this world revolves around all of us. And it's a big deal to learn to live within that context that people may tell us no. And the fact is, we don't always know when a no is good or bad to us. I was thinking about this the other week. About 2 years ago, I think, maybe 3, I got it in my head that I wanted to build a pool. And it was going to be really nice and very stone architect. I found a person that was going to be lovely. It's going to have a little waterfall on it. I was going to have a little grill area and covered patio. And I had the whole thing planned out. It was going to be beautiful. Went to the bank. They thought, oh, okay, no problem. We'll put it through and get you a pool. And then they came back and they denied the loan after everything, after having everything built up. I mean, it was down to almost the date of when they were going to start coming and plowing up the ground. And then the loan fell through. And I was so disappointed. I had received a no that did not resonate with me. I was not very happy about the no that I had just received. But after these last few years, we've had some really bad drought-like weather. The ground is cracked pretty bad to the point that the pool itself may have suffered some damage and would have had repairs for it. I'm sitting there thinking, I could have been spending probably up to 30 minutes a day, maybe longer, every single day out here doing something to this pool. And I probably would have never started this podcast because I would have never had any spare time. I don't really have a lot of time now. If any of you ever knew all the busy work that I did in life, you'd ever wonder how I put together this podcast in the first place. In a way, I live what I'm telling you here. I mean, a lot of stuff I'm telling you, I'm learning with you, or I have learned. I mean, these are things that are real life to me. I'm not, like I said earlier, speaking from some ivory tower and that everything's rosy. No, I'm living out this productivity lifestyle by doing amazing array of things, of work all the way to my passions. Like I'm still working on my album. I know it's been forever since I talked about that, but I'm working on some songs right now. Actually just recorded the bass parts to that, recorded the acoustic guitar parts to that. I'm working on the electric parts, then hope to move over into some vocals. Still planning on doing that. I've started writing a book. Did that a few weeks ago. Haven't done much with it in the past week or so, but I'm pushing myself constantly to go back to these passions. But anyway, back to the pool thing. I look back and I realize, back when they said no, it was devastating. It was a rejection. It was terrible. But now I realize it was probably a very good thing. And I'm grateful that I didn't have to worry with that. It probably would have been nice to have one now. I mean, I'm still not thinking it's a great thing that they said no, but I do see it maybe as a good thing that they said no, that it all worked out. The fact is, we don't really always know when a no is good or bad, and we should be very careful not to place too much of a judgment on that. Doesn't mean that it's going to hurt any less, doesn't mean that it's going to suddenly feel good. This isn't make-believe. If somebody criticizes you, it's going to feel bad. I'm not saying in any of these episodes that you're just going to have this rosy picture of life and be like, oh, that was great, give me some more. No, you're never going to feel like that. It always is going to feel bad. Someone tells you no, it doesn't feel good. It never felt good when you were a toddler and a baby. Do you think it feels any better now that you're an adult? No, it doesn't feel good. But you've got to learn to say it. And you've got to realize that when you tell people that, they aren't always going to like it. And that's just part of it. You're not there to hurt their feelings. If you are, you need to check your attitude. You need to check the reason why you're saying these things. Make sure you're not being aggressive. Make sure you're really being assertive in this. Go back to all the stuff we've said about being assertive, being respectful of everyone involved in these things. But it's just part of it. And it's certainly not selfish to say no. This is what the author says about this. He says, remember that we're not talking about becoming the most selfish person on earth. We're talking about it being your decision what you will and will not do. So what are some strategies for saying no? Well, again, I want to encourage you again to go back to that earlier episode I did, firstthingsproductivity.com/09. And I go through about nearly an hour because I was much longer about action steps back then than I am now. But man, I gave like 10 action steps for saying no and went into all sorts of details of things. And I still believe in everything I said back then now. But I'm not going to repeat that. I'm going to take it from the author, some of his suggestions, which mirror some of mine. And the very first one is use assertive body posture. So it comes back again to our body language, back to our interview with Vanessa Van Edwards. And I hope that you've picked up some of her stuff, thought about picking up some of her stuff. Definitely something that would be highly valuable in this situation. But when you say no, you need to use direct eye contact. You need to keep your head up. You shouldn't be looking down. You shouldn't look ashamed. You shouldn't look like you don't have a right to say no to something. You need to have your shoulders back. Vanessa talks a lot about this, of how we typically tend to shrug over, that we will minimize our space. Our shoulders will droop, our head will droop, and we will kind of cave in. It's kind of the posture of what you see people when they're looking at their phone. They're looking down at this little bitty phone. They're all kind of hunched over. And we've got to be more assertive, and the best way to do that is to expand ourselves, to push our shoulders back. It's almost like, imagine that you have your arms to the side. I have my arms to the side right now, like I'm trying to touch the two walls, and then drop your arms to your side where your shoulders are kind of back and you're up tall. You need to have that type of posture. You need to have your hands in front of you, very relaxed, very visible to people, gesturing normally. You need to have a very calm voice, loud enough to be heard, and just communicate this with your body language. Second thing, you need to decide on your position before you speak. If you're not really confident of what your answer is, then you shouldn't answer anything. You shouldn't say yes. You shouldn't say no. Remember what we said earlier, your most powerful no is a well-defined yes. You should take some time and really reflect on what your yeses are. What do you really want to be saying yes to? Yes, I would say yes to that. I would say yes to this. I would say yes to that. I would say yes to this. Definitely would say yes to this. Well, when you know what those are, then it's very easy to turn around and start saying no to things because you realize it's nothing but distractions to that. Third suggestion is you should wait for the question. Let me read this from the author. He says, some people agree before they are even asked. Here's an example. Distant acquaintance says to you, gosh, I'm not sure how I'm going to get there. And then you interrupt right away. Oh, I'll drive you. If this is one of your stumbling blocks, then even a hint is enough to get you to volunteer your time. This is convenient for the other person because they don't owe you anything. After all, they didn't ask you for the favor. You volunteered. Now, volunteering is just fine when you choose to do it. But if you find yourself volunteering more than you would like and feeling weighed down by too many of the resulting obligations, force yourself to wait for the request. For one thing, requests tend to be fewer than hints. For another, waiting forces others to take responsibility for their request. Gosh, I'm not sure how I'm going to get there. Silence. Would you mind driving me there? And then you can say, okay. This is one of those interesting occasions in which the assertive thing to do is simply to keep your mouth shut for a while. Now, I think that's fascinating because, again, going back to our misconceptions of assertiveness, I thought of assertiveness, again, was always about saying things. And we've learned over and over again in these episodes that sometimes silence is the assertive choice. And speaking up, like this case, someone starts saying something, oh, I'm not sure how I'm going to get there, and you volunteer for it, is not really being assertive. You should wait and give people the dignity and respect to ask you for help, not automatically volunteering help for them. And in being silent and allowing them to ask you, giving the dignity to ask you, is actually the assertive response. Now, I've seen this a lot in my own life. The fact is that many times people aren't ready for an answer anyway until you have allowed them to ask the question. I know I've mentioned this before in a previous episode, but it's amazing how if you're talking to someone and you know what the answer is and you interrupt them, it's almost like they don't even hear you. They keep telling their story, and then you interrupt them again and tell them what the answer is, and then it's almost like they ignore you again and keep going. Then finally at the end, they ask the question, and then you tell them the same thing you said the 3 different times that you interrupted them, and then finally they're able to listen and take that in. We need to give people the dignity to finish what they're saying. And you say, well, they should just know, they should just, and again, that is a paradigm of life that is damaging, my friends. That's not a good way of living. I know people should be better. I know people should just be able to read your mind. I know that people should see that you're really the center of the universe, but the fact is we're not the center of the universe. And the fact is that people aren't very good at doing these types of things. So we can either live in hostility to that, anger to that, or we can live in acceptance of that and work with people in our lives and just realize that many times we have to go the extra mile. We have to go above and beyond what we would normally have to do to listen to people. And the most respectful thing, which is the assertive thing, is again to let people finish what they're saying. And if they're going to ask you to do something, don't automatically complete that and volunteer for something because you know they're going to be asking you. You should give them the dignity to actually ask you first. And then you can either say yes or no, and it's your choice. Another cool thing to keep in mind is to decide on your wording. It would be a good practice for you to think about how you will say no to things, to be very clear about how you're going to answer something, to not leave people wondering. You know, we use these language, well, I'm not sure if, or maybe later sometime I can do this. See, we will often use vague language as an attempt to say no, but it kind of sounds a little bit like yes. Well, maybe later I can do something. Is saying, no, I'm not going to do it now, but just to make it sound nicer, I'll say that maybe later I could do it. It's kind of a half yes, half no type thing. Instead of just coming out and saying, no, I'm sorry, I can't help you with that. Now, notice what I just did here. It's the next point. The next point of something you should work to fix in your life, to not say, and that is to not apologize when it isn't necessary. So you saw what I just said, or heard what I said, not saw. I said, I'm sorry, I can't help you right now. I apologized. I really should, but I have to do this. We've got to learn to avoid saying things like that as much as we can, to not apologize because we're saying no. not apologize because there's something else we have to do, not apologize because we're living according to our passions. And so instead of saying, I'm sorry, I really can't, you can say, I would have loved to have helped, but I'm having to do this instead. Now, even what I just said hinted at the next thing that the author says, and that is to not defend yourself or make excuses when it isn't necessary. So you shouldn't apologize if it isn't necessary. You should also not make excuses if it isn't necessary. So what I said is, I would have loved to have helped you, but I can't because, and then I explain. It's like I have to give you a rationale why I can't help. And then we have to defend it. We have to tell people why that's the case. Here's what the author says about this. He says, offering excuses about why you can't fulfill the request is usually dishonest. It's not that you can't do it, it's that you choose not to do it. Giving excuses also invites the other person to help you find a way around the barrier, such as, you can't because you have to have the car service? Well, no problem. You can do that tonight at a garage I know, then you'll be free to drive me tomorrow. We give people excuses, and many times they will try to solve that so that we can say yes to them. And that's another bad reason for using excuses, is we invite people to counteract us and to solve these problems so that we will say yes to them. Another thing we have to avoid is to ask permission to say no. How many times have you said, or someone said to you, would it be okay if I didn't go there or I didn't do this? Will you be annoyed if I say no? You realize what we're doing when we do that is we're asking other people permission for us to say no to them. And that's a wrong message. That is something we do not want to do. We're not giving people that right in our lives to give us permission to say no. If we want to say no, we just say no. We respect that other person. We're honest with them. We're not giving excuses. We're not apologizing, and we're not asking them permission to say no. The next tip the author gives is to strengthen your position. And this is something I mentioned earlier in the episode, is to not expect that people are going to accept your no, your refusal the first time around. They will sometimes come back and counter. If you're giving them excuses, they're going to try to fix those excuses so that you can say yes. So you may have to use this figure 8. You may just have to be very diligent in coming back and saying no. They're going to come back maybe and say, well, what about this? Or can you do this? Please, will you consider doing this? And if you're not careful, you will give in. And you have to just say, no, as I said, I'm not willing to do that. Or again, I'm not willing to do that. Or just simply no. The broken record technique is the next suggestion. Very similar to what I'm saying again in this figure 8 example. He says this in the book. He says, don't feel you have to rephrase your response every time you give it. Doing so may cause the person making the request to believe you're weakening, such as eventually he'll run out of ways of saying no, then he'll say yes. You don't have to find the magic words that will satisfy the other person. Using a response once doesn't wear it out. If you keep repeating the same message, eventually they'll hear it. No, I'm not willing to do that. No, I'm not willing to do that. No, I'm not willing to do that. We keep just saying the same thing. It's this figure 8. Worried that this will sound odd? Well, it doesn't matter. It won't sound as odd as you think. At any rate, the fear of sounding odd is a trap that can keep you in the control of others. Another technique he talks about is to not wait for acceptance. Many times when we say no, we will wait for someone to acknowledge it and say, well, I understand, or I agree, or it's okay. And if we don't see that, then we will often go overboard to make it up to them. If they look disappointed, well, we can't stand that because we can't stand the fact they may be rejecting us, or we fear they're going to reject us. If they don't accept what we have to say, we'll start caving in. We'll start explaining ourselves. This is when we'll start giving the excuses because they frowned at us. They don't look like they've accepted what we had to say. We feel it's our job to convince them, of making them believe. Remember, this is our battle we talked about many weeks ago that is more about the aggressive style. It's our misconception of assertiveness being aggressiveness, is that we feel we must convince people. We feel that we must change people's minds about something. And that is not assertiveness. Assertiveness respects the fact that when I say no to you, you may be upset with me. You may disagree with me. You may not like that I just said no to you. And I acknowledge that. I'm not going to try to placate it. I'm not going to try to gloss over it. I'm not trying to hurt you in any way, but I realize you may not like what I just said to you. And then the last point that the author gives is to accept the consequences. Here's what he says about this. You have the right to say no, but others have the right not to like it. In fact, others are entitled to think you are inconsiderate or unreasonable. Sometimes they may be right. When you say no, there might be unpleasant consequences in the way the others react. Recognize and accept this. And then he gives an example. Uncle Frank might really be offended if you say he can't stay at your home all next spring. He's allowed to feel whatever he feels. Now, I think it's very interesting that what the author says in there about that others may think you are inconsiderate or unreasonable. Sometimes they may be right. See, it goes back again to what we said in earlier episodes. You can feel the way you do, and the ultimate respect is for you to acknowledge what you feel. And it may be unreasonable. 6 months from now, a year from now, 10 years from now, you may look back at something and say, that was kind of unreasonable of me. It was very inconsiderate of me. And that's just part of being human. That's part of growing. We all face this. There's many times that we will stand by something and we will say, this is my yes category, to only realize a few years later you were adrift a little bit in that. Maybe you were a little inconsiderate or unreasonable, but you have that right, just as other people have that right. And that's a hard pill to swallow, my friends, because we're saying assertiveness is that if you give yourself the right to sometimes be inconsiderate and unreasonable, then you need to give that right to other people. So other people may tell you no and do it in a way that's very inconsiderate, very unreasonable when they tell you no, and you have to respect that if you want that same respect for yourself. And that's not a very easy thing to do. Now, the author then goes into a bunch of examples, again, practice sessions of fending off requests. So there's a whole exercise in there, again, that you can play out with a partner or friend in which they make certain kinds of requests, like, can I borrow your lawnmower? Or a sister or brother says, I like you to handle all of mom's financial affairs. Or someone comes to you and says, I have too many cats, I'm giving this one to you. Just different types of things. And then you go through and actually practice this with another person. And there's all these kinds of examples like that in the book, to think before you agree to something, of delaying agreement. So you actually practice delaying agreement with something. Give yourself some time and some space. Again, I would encourage you to pick up the book, to work through some of those examples, to learn how to put into effect some of these strategies for saying no. And like I said earlier, I would highly encourage you, I know I said this 3 times, and I'm sorry, I don't usually repeat myself that much on past episodes, but I go into a lot of techniques on saying no in episode 9 of First Things. I would definitely encourage you to go back and listen to some of those techniques about how to say no and be free of criticism, free of manipulation. So next week, we are going to get into some of our more tough cases, how to make requests without controlling other people. How can we make requests without dipping into manipulation? Or maybe we fear manipulation. This has hit me many times, that sometimes it's hard for me to make requests because I am afraid I'm going to end up manipulating other people. Well, how can we effectively make requests without dipping into that? And then finally, how do we deal with confrontation? Not just criticism, but outright confrontation. And we're going to spend 2 weeks talking about how to deal with confrontation. And then we'll probably have one last week about, in his postscript chapter, about being you, how to be yourself. After everything, let's wrap it all up. Let's give a broad summary of what it means to be assertive. Well, that's going to wrap up this episode on learning to say no. I hope some of the things I've shared today will help you pursue your life with greater passion, greater purpose, live with assertiveness in your life. If you have some questions about how to say no, or does it mean this, or I'm not sure about this, leave me a comment at firstthingsproductivity.com/43. That's the numbers 43. Go all the way down to the very bottom. You can leave me some comments there. You can also leave me some comments on Twitter, Facebook, and different things like that. You can leave me a voicemail if you have some comments or questions. Would be more than happy to look at those and to interact with you about those particular things. Again, if you would love to leave me a rating, a comment on iTunes, on Stitcher, BlackBerry, all the different places that you may be listening to me, that would be amazing and wonderful. Would greatly appreciate anything that you might leave me there. So until next time, remember this, and I said this at the end of episode 9. Attitude is the difference between an ordeal and an adventure. Stand up for yourself and say no, but say no to enable the important things to say yes to. Your most powerful no is a well-defined yes. Work toward win-win situations whenever possible, and when you absolutely cannot, agree to disagree and use some of the techniques that we talked about in this episode and episode 9 to push away manipulation, criticism, and guilt. Embrace today with passion and intention, and don't die with your music still inside you.